Margaret Whitfield adjusted her Hermes scarf as she stepped out of her BMW X7 in the parking lot of Whitfield Automotive Empire. The October air in Charlotte, North Carolina carried the scent of money from the upscale Myers Park neighborhood, where her family's chain of luxury car dealerships dominated the landscape. At 32, she had inherited her father's sharp business acumen and, unfortunately, his deeply ingrained prejudices about who deserved success in America. "Good morning, Miss Whitfield," called Janet, her assistant, hurrying to match her brisk pace toward the executive offices. "Your father wants to see you about the quarterly reports before the board meeting." Margaret nodded curtly, her designer heels clicking against the polished marble floors of the showroom. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she could see the service bay where mechanics in Navy uniforms worked on vehicles worth more than most people's homes. Her gaze lingered dismissively on the workers, mostly Black and Hispanic men who, in her mind, were fortunate to have jobs at all in her family's empire. "Tell me again why we employ so many of them?" she asked Janet quietly, gesturing toward the service area. "Surely we could find more qualified technicians who would better represent our brand image." Janet shifted uncomfortably. "Well, some of them are highly skilled, and they work for reasonable wages." "Reasonable wages for reasonable work," Margaret interrupted. "I just think our clientele expects a certain standard. When Mrs. Patterson brings in her Maserati, she shouldn't have to worry about the cultural differences of who's handling her vehicle." As they entered the executive wing, Margaret's father, Robert Whitfield, emerged from his office. At 65, he carried himself with the authority of a man who had built an automotive empire from a single dealership. His conservative values and traditional Southern upbringing had shaped not only his business practices, but also his daughter's worldview. "Margaret, perfect timing," he said, embracing her. "I've been reviewing our service department efficiency. Reports. We might need to make some adjustments to our staffing." "I was just discussing that with Janet," Margaret replied, settling into the leather chair across from his mahogany desk. "Perhaps we should consider recruiting from more traditional backgrounds. The technical schools in the better neighborhoods must produce qualified candidates." Robert nodded approvingly. "Exactly what I was thinking. We've been too charitable, giving opportunities to people who might not fully appreciate the responsibility that comes with representing our family name." Through the office window, Margaret watched a young Black mechanic carefully examining the engine of a pristine Jaguar. Something about his focused attention irritated her, an assumption that he was probably in over his head with such sophisticated machinery. In her mind, success came from breeding, education, and natural intelligence, qualities she believed were distributed unequally across racial lines. "That's Marcus Johnson," her father said, following her gaze. "Been here 2 years. Technically. Competent, I suppose, but I question whether he truly understands the value of what he's working on." Margaret made a mental note. People like Marcus Johnson represented everything she found problematic about modern employment practices. Hiring based on diversity rather than merit, giving opportunities to individuals who couldn't possibly comprehend the level of excellence her family's business demanded. As she prepared for the board meeting, a small incident outside caught her attention. An elderly white customer was arguing loudly with Marcus about a repair estimate, clearly questioning his expertise. Margaret watched with satisfaction as the scene unfolded, confirming her belief that natural hierarchies would always assert themselves. Some people were simply born to lead, while others were meant to follow, and the sooner everyone accepted their proper place, the better society would function. Hello, the Shade of Love family. So happy you're here. Before we jump into the next part of the story, tell us, where are you watching from? Drop your country and state in the comments. Also, how's the story been so far? We love reading your thoughts. Yes, every single comment. And it really keeps us motivated. Let's aim for 50 comments on this video. Think we can hit it? Your support means the world, so don't forget to comment, share, and keep the energy flowing. That evening, Margaret joined her parents for dinner at the Charlotte Country Club, where 3 generations of Whitfields had maintained membership. The dining room buzzed with familiar faces. doctors, lawyers, business owners, and old money families who formed Charlotte's social elite. Here, among the crystal chandeliers and oil paintings of Confederate generals, Margaret felt most at home. "How was your day, sweetheart?" asked her mother, Catherine, delicately cutting her filet mignon. At 58, Catherine embodied Southern grace and tradition, having been raised in a prominent Charleston family that traced their lineage to antebellum plantation owners. "Productive," Margaret replied, savoring her wine. "Daddy and I were discussing the service department. I think we need to be more selective about our hiring practices." Her parents exchanged approving glances. Robert leaned forward conspiratorially. "You know, when I started this business, people understood their place. There was respect for hierarchy, for expertise earned through proper channels. Now everyone thinks they're entitled to positions they haven't truly earned." Catherine nodded. "It's the same at the hospital auxiliary. They've pushed diversity initiatives so aggressively that merit has become secondary. I'm not prejudiced, mind you. I believe everyone deserves opportunities appropriate to their capabilities. But forcing artificial equality creates problems for everyone." Margaret found comfort in her mother's reasoning. It wasn't about hatred or superiority. It was about natural order, about recognizing that different groups had different strengths and limitations. In her mind, acknowledging these differences was simply being realistic about human nature and social dynamics. "Take that Marcus fellow," she said, describing the mechanic she'd observed. "I'm sure he's trying his best, but when Mrs. Patterson brings in her Maserati, does he really have the cultural understanding to appreciate what that car represents? The craftsmanship, the heritage, the investment?" Her father chuckled. "Exactly. It's like expecting someone who grew up in government housing to understand fine art or classical music. They might learn the mechanics, but they'll never truly comprehend the deeper significance." As dinner continued, their conversation drifted to broader social issues. Margaret listened as her parents and their friends discussed their frustrations with affirmative action, welfare programs, and what they saw as the decline of traditional American values. Each story reinforced her worldview, that society functioned best when everyone accepted their natural roles, when merit was recognized and rewarded appropriately. Dr. Harrison, a family friend, leaned in. "The problem is, we've created a culture of victimhood. Instead of encouraging people to improve themselves through hard work and education, we've taught them to blame others for their circumstances." "Absolutely," Margaret agreed. "Personal responsibility used to mean something in this country. If you wanted success, you earned it through dedication and character. Now everyone expects handouts." Walking to her car after dinner, Margaret felt reinforced in her beliefs. These weren't prejudices. They were observations based on logic and experience. Her family had built their wealth through generations of hard work, smart decisions, and moral character. If others hadn't achieved similar success, it was because they lacked those qualities, not because of systemic barriers or discrimination. As she drove through Charlotte's neighborhoods, the contrast was obvious. The tree-lined streets of Myers Park, where she lived, showcased beautiful homes, well-maintained lawns, and expensive cars. Miles away, in neighborhoods like Greer Heights, she saw run-down apartments, corner stores with barred windows, and groups of young black men who, in her mind, probably didn't have jobs or legitimate purposes for being on the street corners. The drive home reinforced everything her parents had taught her about natural social order, about the consequences of good and poor choices, about why some communities thrived while others struggled. In Margaret's mind, these weren't racist observations. They were simply reality, and pretending otherwise helped no one. The next morning, Margaret arrived at the dealership with renewed purpose. She had decided to implement more stringent customer service standards, not because she disliked anyone personally, but because maintaining excellence required attention to details that others might overlook. Her first stop was the service department, where she planned to observe interactions between technicians and customers. As regional manager, she told herself, it was her responsibility to ensure that every client received service befitting their investment in luxury vehicles. "Good morning, everyone," she announced to the service team during their daily briefing. "I'll be spending more time observing our customer interactions to ensure we're meeting the Whitfield standard of excellence." The mechanics, including Marcus Johnson, nodded respectfully. Margaret noticed how Marcus seemed to pay particular attention to her words, which she interpreted as nervousness, probably aware that his position wasn't as secure as the others. Her first observation came when Mrs. Elizabeth Carrington, a prominent surgeon's wife, brought in her Bentley for routine maintenance. Margaret watched as Marcus approached the vehicle, and she immediately felt concerned. Mrs. Carrington was accustomed to a certain level of service, and Margaret worried that Marcus might not understand the delicacy required when dealing with such an exclusive clientele. "Mrs. Carrington," Margaret intervened smoothly, approaching the counter. "What a pleasure to see you. I'll personally ensure your Bentley receives our premium attention today." She turned to Marcus with a polite but firm smile. "Marcus, I think James would be better suited for Mrs. Carrington's vehicle today. Perhaps you could handle the Honda that came in this morning?" Marcus's face showed a flicker of confusion, but he simply nodded. "Of course, Miss Whitfield. Whatever you think is best." Margaret felt satisfied with her diplomatic handling of the situation. She hadn't said anything inappropriate. She'd simply made a business decision based on customer relations and employee strengths. Mrs. Carrington seemed pleased with the extra attention, confirming Margaret's judgment. Later, when a young black woman brought in her BMW for service, Margaret noticed Marcus was assigned to the job. She observed from a distance as he explained the necessary repairs with technical expertise and patience. The customer seemed satisfied, even impressed, but Margaret rationalized that BMWs were more mainstream than Bentleys, less demanding of the subtle understanding that truly luxury service required. During lunch, Margaret overheard a conversation between Marcus and another mechanic, David Chin, about a complex electrical problem they'd solved that morning. Marcus was describing a diagnostic approach that impressed even David, who had 15 years of experience. Margaret felt mildly annoyed by the conversation, not because Marcus was incompetent, but because she sensed he might be overreaching, trying to prove something beyond his natural capabilities. "Margaret," called Tom Rodriguez, the service manager, approaching her table in the employee break room. "I wanted to thank you for the customer service focus. Though I should mention, Marcus Johnson has our highest customer satisfaction ratings and technical certifications. Customers specifically request him." Margaret smiled diplomatically. "I'm sure he works very hard. I just want to ensure we're making strategic decisions about matching technicians with our most discerning clientele. It's about understanding the complete customer experience, not just technical competence." Tom nodded, though his expression suggested mild confusion. Margaret didn't explain further. As a Hispanic manager, Tom probably didn't fully grasp the nuances of high-end customer relations either. It wasn't his fault. These weren't perspectives that could be taught through training manuals. As the day ended, Margaret felt she'd handled everything professionally and appropriately. She hadn't discriminated against anyone. She'd simply applied business judgment to ensure customer satisfaction. If certain employees felt overlooked, perhaps that would motivate them to demonstrate higher levels of cultural competency and professional understanding. Walking to her car, she noticed Marcus in the parking lot, carefully examining something under the hood of an old Chevrolet. The car looked like it belonged to one of the dealership's support staff, definitely not a customer vehicle. Margaret wondered briefly what he was doing, but dismissed it as probably another example of him overextending himself into areas beyond his responsibility. 3 weeks later, Margaret's carefully ordered world collided with reality in the most unexpected way. She had been driving to a client meeting in her father's newest acquisition, a pristine white Maserati Quattroporte, when mechanical trouble struck on Independence Boulevard, one of Charlotte's busiest thoroughfares. The engine began making alarming sounds, and within minutes, the luxury vehicle was dead on the side of the road. Margaret sat in frustrated disbelief, checking her phone for the nearest luxury towing service while traffic rushed past her. She had a crucial presentation with potential investors in 30 minutes, and this mechanical failure threatened everything she'd prepared for weeks. As she waited for roadside assistance, a familiar pickup truck pulled up behind her. Margaret's heart sank as she recognized Marcus Johnson stepping out, wearing his work clothes and carrying a toolbox. Of all the people who might stop to help, this was the most awkward possible situation. "Miss Whitfield? Are you having car trouble?" Marcus approached her window with genuine concern, showing no hint of the awkwardness she felt about their recent interactions. "I've already called for assistance, thank you," Margaret replied stiffly, trying to maintain professional distance. "A tow truck should be here soon." Marcus glanced at his watch. "With this traffic and the construction on I-277, you might be waiting at least an hour. Mind if I take a quick look? Sometimes it's something simple that doesn't require towing." Margaret hesitated. Accepting help from Marcus felt like admitting some kind of defeat, like acknowledging that he possessed expertise she needed. But her investor meeting was critical, and an hour delay would be catastrophic. "I suppose you could look," she said reluctantly. "But this is a very expensive, complicated vehicle. It's not like the cars you usually work on." Marcus nodded patiently and popped the hood. As he examined the engine, Margaret watched with growing anxiety and skepticism. This was a $150,000 Italian masterpiece of engineering. Surely its problems were beyond the scope of someone from Marcus's background. "Found it," Marcus said after 5 minutes. "Your alternator belt snapped and there's a loose connection to the battery terminal. I can fix the connection, but you'll need a new belt." "A belt?" Margaret asked incredulously. "That can't be right. This car has the most advanced engineering in the world." Marcus smiled gently. "Even the most advanced engineering depends on basic components. Here, let me show you." He guided Margaret to the engine and carefully explained what had happened, pointing out the broken belt and demonstrating how the alternator system worked. His explanation was clear, patient, and technically sophisticated, far more detailed than she'd expected. As he spoke, Margaret realized that Marcus understood this engine better than she understood her own business sometimes. "I have a replacement belt in my truck," Marcus continued. "It's not the exact OEM part, but it'll get you to your meeting safely. You can have it properly replaced later." Margaret watched in amazement as Marcus worked with confident precision, his hands moving expertly through the complex engine compartment. Within 15 minutes, the Maserati was purring perfectly. He refused her offer of payment and even cleaned his hands so he wouldn't leave any marks on her car. "Thank you," Margaret said quietly, genuinely surprised by his competence and kindness. I have to admit I didn't expect that I'd know how to fix a Maserati," Marcus asked with a slight smile, but no trace of resentment. "I've been working on engines since I was 12. Italian, German, Japanese, metal and electricity work the same way regardless of the price tag." As Margaret drove away, her mind raced with confusion. Everything about this encounter challenged her assumptions about Marcus, about competence, about who possessed real expertise. For the first time, she wondered if her judgments about people might be based on something other than actual ability and character. The investor meeting went brilliantly, but Margaret couldn't stop thinking about Marcus's calm confidence, his refusal to accept payment, and the quiet dignity with which he'd helped someone who had consistently underestimated him. That night, Margaret lay in her king-size bed, staring at the ceiling of her Myers Park mansion, unable to sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Marcus Johnson's patient smile as he explained the alternator system, his competent hands working on her expensive car, his gracious refusal to accept payment for helping someone who had clearly doubted his abilities. She kept replaying the moment when he said, "Metal and electricity work the same way regardless of the price tag." The statement seemed simple, but it had shaken something fundamental in her worldview. If technical expertise was truly universal, what did that mean about her assumptions regarding who could master complex skills? The next morning at breakfast, Margaret found herself distracted as her mother discussed plans for the upcoming charity gala, an annual event where Charlotte's elite raised money for worthy causes while networking and reinforcing social connections. "You seem preoccupied, darling," Catherine observed, sipping her coffee from Wedgwood china. "Is everything all right with the business?" Margaret hesitated. "Mother, have you ever had your assumptions about someone proven completely wrong?" Catherine raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Yesterday, one of our mechanics helped me when the Maserati broke down. I had thought he wouldn't be capable of handling such a sophisticated car, but he fixed it expertly and refused payment. It made me wonder if I'd misjudged his abilities. Her mother's expression grew concerned. Margaret, being grateful for help doesn't mean you should question everything you've learned about social dynamics. Sometimes people can exceed expectations in limited areas while still lacking broader cultural understanding. Margaret nodded, but doubt continued gnawing at her. That afternoon, she found herself walking through the service department with new eyes, observing Marcus as he worked on a complex BMW electrical system. His diagnostic process was methodical and sophisticated, and when a younger white mechanic asked for advice, Marcus explained the problem with patience and expertise. When Tom Rodriguez approached her later, she impulsively asked, "Tell me about Marcus Johnson's background." Tom looked surprised. "Marcus? He's one of our best technicians. Graduated top of his class from Central Piedmont Community College, has certifications in European luxury vehicles, and customers specifically request him. He's also working toward his bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering at UNC Charlotte. Night. Classes. Engineering degree?" Margaret felt stunned. "Yeah, he wants to eventually design automotive systems. He's incredibly smart. Speaks some German and Italian because he wanted to understand the technical manuals in their original languages." Margaret walked away feeling disoriented. This information contradicted everything she'd believed about Marcus's capabilities and ambitions. He wasn't just a competent mechanic. He was an intellectual pursuing advanced education, a person with sophisticated goals and international perspectives. That evening, she sat in her home office surrounded by the trappings of inherited success. Diplomas from private schools, family photos with business leaders, awards from exclusive organizations. For the first time, she wondered what she had actually achieved through her own merit versus what had been handed to her because of her family name and financial resources. Her phone rang. It was Dr. Harrison, her family's friend from the country club. "Margaret, I heard one of your mechanics helped you yesterday. That was fortunate." "Yes, very fortunate," Margaret replied carefully. "Just remember, sweetheart, exceptional cases don't change general patterns. Some individuals can exceed expectations, but that doesn't invalidate what we know about group differences and natural hierarchies." After hanging up, Margaret felt more confused than comforted. Dr. Harrison's words were meant to preserve her worldview, but they felt hollow against the reality of Marcus's expertise, education, and character. She was beginning to suspect that her general patterns might be based on limited exposure and inherited prejudices rather than actual observation and experience. As she prepared for bed, Margaret realized she was facing a choice. She could dismiss this incident as an anomaly and maintain her comfortable beliefs, or she could acknowledge that maybe, just maybe, she had been wrong about some very fundamental things. Hello, the Shade of Love family. So happy you're here. Before we jump into the next part of the story, tell us, where are you watching from? Drop your country and state in the comments. Also, how's the story been so far? We love reading your thoughts. Yes, every single comment, and it really keeps us motivated. Let's aim for 50 comments on this video. Think we can hit it? Your support means the world, so don't forget to comment, share, and keep the energy flowing. Margaret's curiosity about Marcus intensified over the following week. She began observing him more carefully, not with the critical eye she'd used before, but with genuine interest in understanding who he really was beyond her assumptions. On Thursday morning, she witnessed something that completely altered her perception. While reviewing inventory reports near the service bay windows, she noticed Marcus working on a beat-up Honda Civic that clearly wasn't a customer vehicle. The car belonged to Rosa Martinez, one of the dealership's cleaning staff, and Margaret could see Rosa standing nearby looking worried. "Miss Rosa, I think I found the problem," Marcus was saying in fluent Spanish, which surprised Margaret. She hadn't known he spoke a second language. "Your transmission fluid is leaking, but it's not as expensive as the other shop told you." Rosa's face showed relief. "But Marcus, I still can't afford much right now. My son's medical bills. Don't worry about that, Marcus interrupted gently. I'll fix it after work using parts from the salvage yard. You just pay for the fluid, maybe. $30. Margaret watched as Rosa's eyes filled with tears of gratitude. Marcus, you are an angel. How can I thank you? Just keep taking good care of our building, Marcus smiled. Your work makes everyone's day better. After Rosa left, Margaret approached. Marcus. She found him gathering tools, preparing to return to his assigned work. That was very kind of you, she said carefully. Marcus looked up, surprised to see her. Oh, Miss Whitfield, Rosa's a good person who works hard. Sometimes we all need help, but fixing her car for free using your own time, that's quite generous. Marcus shrugged. My grandfather taught me that skills are gifts meant to be shared. If I can help someone keep their transportation working so they can support their family, that feels right. Margaret found herself genuinely curious. Your grandfather taught you about cars? Among other things, Marcus nodded. He was a mechanic in the Air Force, then ran a small shop in the community. He always said that competence without compassion is just selfishness. Before Margaret could respond, another mechanic called for Marcus's help with a difficult diagnostic problem on a Mercedes-Benz. She watched as Marcus approached the complex issue with systematic analysis, using advanced diagnostic equipment, with the confidence of someone who truly understood automotive engineering. During lunch, Margaret impulsively asked Janet to research Marcus's background more thoroughly. What she learned astonished her. Marcus had grown up in a working-class neighborhood but had been an honor student throughout school. He'd turned down a full academic scholarship to NC State University to care for his sick grandmother, instead choosing community college so he could work and provide for his family. The research revealed more surprising details. Marcus volunteered at a community center teaching automotive basics to teenagers, hoping to provide them with marketable skills. He was also involved in a local church's financial literacy program, helping families understand budgeting and credit. Repair. That afternoon, Margaret observed Marcus helping an elderly white customer, Mr. Peterson, who was clearly frustrated with his car troubles and taking his anger out on everyone around him. Son, I don't think you people understand what this car means to me, Mr. Peterson said condescendingly to Marcus. This Jaguar belonged to my father. It has sentimental value that I doubt you can comprehend. Instead of responding with defensiveness or anger, Marcus listened patiently. Mr. Peterson, I can see this car is special to you. Let me explain exactly what's wrong and how we can fix it to preserve both its performance and its sentimental value. Margaret watched as Marcus spent extra time with Mr. Peterson, explaining each step of the repair process, showing genuine respect for the car's history and the customer's emotional attachment. By the end of the conversation, Mr. Peterson was thanking Marcus and apologizing for his initial rudeness. You know, son, Mr. Peterson said, you understand customer service better than most people twice your age. Your parents raised you right. Walking back to her office, Margaret felt something shifting fundamentally in her understanding. Marcus wasn't just technically competent. He was emotionally intelligent, culturally sophisticated, and morally generous. He possessed exactly the qualities she claimed to value most: excellence, integrity, respect for others, and genuine dedication to service. For the first time, Margaret began to suspect that her judgments about people had been based not on their actual character or capabilities, but on superficial characteristics that had nothing to do with merit or worth. The following Saturday, Margaret attended the monthly Myers Park Neighborhood Association meeting, where Charlotte's most influential families gathered to discuss community issues. The topic of discussion was a proposed affordable housing development that would bring diverse residents into their exclusive area. We're not opposed to helping people, declared Mrs. Hamilton, a real estate heiress whose family had controlled prime Charlotte properties for generations. But property values and community character must be protected. We've worked hard to maintain a certain standard. Margaret found herself listening with new ears to conversations she'd heard countless times before. The coded language, certain standards, community character, property values, suddenly seemed less about legitimate concerns and more about exclusion based on race and class. Her phone buzzed with a text from her college sorority sister, Amanda. "Saw your mechanic story on social media. Dad says you're getting too friendly with the help. Just looking out for you, girl." Margaret felt embarrassed and confused. Had she shared too much about Marcus? Was her growing respect for him being interpreted as something inappropriate by her social circle? At Sunday brunch with her parents, the conversation inevitably turned to recent social changes in Charlotte. Her father was particularly agitated about a news story regarding diversity initiatives in local businesses. "The problem is, they're forcing artificial equality," Robert declared, cutting his eggs Benedict aggressively. "When you prioritize demographics over qualifications, everyone suffers. Standards decline, and truly qualified people get passed over." "Absolutely," Catherine agreed. "I'm not prejudiced against anyone, but natural hierarchies exist for reasons. Some people are simply better suited for leadership roles, while others excel in supporting positions." Margaret found herself thinking about Marcus's educational background, his multilingual abilities, his leadership among other mechanics, his volunteer work. Did her parents' theory about natural hierarchies account for someone like him? Or were there generalizations based on limited information and inherited assumptions? "Margaret, you've been quiet," her mother observed. "You're not buying into all this social justice nonsense, are you? Your generation sometimes gets confused by idealistic thinking." "I'm just observing," Margaret replied carefully. "Sometimes individual cases make you question broader generalizations." Her father leaned forward with concern. "Sweetheart, individual exceptions don't invalidate general principles. There will always be outliers, but they don't change fundamental truths about social order and group characteristics." After brunch, Margaret received a call from Dr. Harrison. "Margaret, I heard you've been spending time around the service department. Just remember that familiarity can breed confusion about appropriate boundaries. These people are employees, not peers." That evening, Margaret attended a charity event at the Charlotte Museum of History, where she mingled with the same faces she'd known since childhood: doctors, lawyers, business owners, and inherited wealth families who formed Charlotte's social elite. The conversations were familiar: concerns about changing demographics, complaints about government programs, and subtle reinforcement of beliefs about who deserved success. "The problem with modern society," declared Judge Williams, a family friend, "is that we've abandoned merit-based advancement. Now everyone thinks they're entitled to opportunities they haven't earned through proper channels." Margaret found herself remembering Marcus's academic achievements, his technical certifications, his ongoing engineering studies. Had he not earned advancement through proper channels? Or were the proper channels defined in ways that excluded people like him, regardless of their qualifications? As the evening progressed, Margaret realized that her social circle's worldview required maintaining certain beliefs about different groups of people. Acknowledging Marcus's excellence, intelligence, and character threatened the entire framework that justified their exclusive privileges and social positions. Walking to her car after the event, Margaret felt the weight of her community's expectations. Everyone around her was reinforcing the same messages she'd grown up with, the same assumptions about social order and natural hierarchies. But these messages now felt hollow and measured against the reality of Marcus's character and capabilities. She was beginning to understand that questioning her prejudices meant more than just changing her mind about one person. It meant challenging the entire social system that had shaped her identity and given meaning to her privileged position. The opportunity for honest conversation came unexpectedly the following Tuesday. Margaret had stayed late to review quarterly reports when she noticed Marcus still in the service bay, working on what appeared to be a personal project. Curiosity overcame her usual professional distance, and she approached him. "Working late?" she asked, noticing he was carefully rebuilding an engine that clearly wasn't from a customer vehicle. Marcus looked up, surprised but not unwelcoming. "Yes, ma'am. This is for the Community Center program, teaching kids about automotive repair. We're rebuilding this engine so they can see how everything fits together." Margaret found herself genuinely interested. "That's quite a commitment, donating your personal time. It's worth it if even one kid discovers they love working with their hands and decides to pursue technical education. Lots of them think they're Only options are minimum wage jobs or other paths. Something in his tone made Margaret pause. She realized she'd never actually asked Marcus about his perspective on anything beyond automotive repair. "Marcus, can I ask you something personal? I've been thinking about our conversation when you helped me with the Maserati. You said metal and electricity work the same way regardless of price. That struck me." Marcus set down his tools and gave her his full attention. "What do you mean?" Margaret took a breath, feeling nervous, but determined to understand. "I think I've made assumptions about you, about your capabilities and background. I'm beginning to realize those assumptions might have been wrong." "What kind of assumptions?" Marcus asked gently, without defensiveness. "I assumed you wouldn't understand luxury vehicles, that your education and experience were limited, that you couldn't relate to our higher-end clientele." Margaret felt vulnerable admitting this. "I realize now those assumptions weren't based on anything real about you personally." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "Miss Whitfield, can I be honest with you? Please. I've known about those assumptions since my first day here. When customers see me approaching their BMW or Mercedes, some of them specifically request a different technician. When I explain complex repairs, some people ask to speak to a manager for confirmation. It's not personal, it's just how things are." Margaret felt a stab of shame. "How do you handle that?" "I prove myself through excellence. I let my work speak for itself. And I remember that everyone's carrying assumptions based on their experiences and what they've been taught. Most people aren't hateful. They're just limited by what they've been exposed to." "But doesn't that make you angry?" Margaret asked. Marcus considered the question carefully. "Sometimes frustrated, sure, but anger would just hurt me. Instead, I focus on changing minds through demonstration. Like with you, I could tell you doubted my ability with the Maserati, but after I fixed it, you started seeing me differently." Margaret realized he was right. "You were very gracious about my assumptions. My grandfather taught me that you can't force people to respect you, but you can earn it through character and competence. He said the goal isn't to prove others wrong. It's to prove yourself worthy of whatever opportunities come your way." "Your grandfather sounds wise. What else did he teach you?" Marcus smiled. "That intelligence and character aren't distributed according to race or class. That every person deserves to be judged as an individual. That success comes from education, hard work, and treating others with dignity, regardless of their background." Margaret felt moved by his perspective. "I have to admit, Marcus, you've challenged some beliefs I grew up with. You're clearly intelligent, educated, and skilled. You speak multiple languages. You're pursuing an engineering degree. You volunteer in your community. You're nothing like what I expected when I first met you." "What did you expect?" Marcus asked, genuinely curious rather than confrontational. Margaret struggled with how honest to be. Someone less sophisticated, less ambitious, less capable of understanding complex concepts. She paused. "I realize now those expectations were based on prejudices, not facts." "I appreciate your honesty," Marcus said, "and I understand where those prejudices come from. Most people have limited exposure to individuals outside their own social circles. If the only black mechanics you've known were less experienced or less educated, it makes sense you'd generalize from that limited sample. But that's no excuse for treating you unfairly or making assumptions about your capabilities," Margaret said. "No, but it's human nature. The question is what you do when you realize your assumptions were wrong. Some people double down on their prejudices. Others, like you seem to be doing, question whether their beliefs match reality." As their conversation continued, Margaret found herself seeing Marcus not just as a skilled employee, but as a thoughtful person with valuable perspectives on life, education, and human nature. His insights about prejudice, excellence, and character were as sophisticated as any she'd heard in her graduate business courses. The crisis that would define Margaret's transformation began with a phone call at 2:47 a.m. on a rainy Thursday in November. Margaret jolted awake to her cell phone ringing insistently. The caller ID showed her father's number. "Daddy? What's wrong?" Robert's voice was shaking with panic. "Margaret, there's been an accident. Emma's car went off the road near University City. She's trapped inside and the first responders are having trouble getting her out." Emma was Margaret's 26-year-old sister, a social worker who had been driving home from a late case visit. Margaret's blood went cold as her father continued. The car flipped into a ravine off Highway 29. The rescue team is there, but they're saying the vehicle is unstable and they need specialized equipment to extract her safely. Margaret threw on clothes and raced toward the accident scene, her mind spinning with fear and desperation. When she arrived, the scene was chaotic. Fire trucks, ambulances, and police cars with flashing lights illuminating a horrific sight. Emma's Honda Accord had flipped and rolled down a steep embankment, coming to rest on its roof against a cluster of trees. Through the crowd of emergency responders, Margaret spotted a familiar figure working intensely near the wreckage. It was Marcus Johnson, wearing civilian clothes but clearly coordinating with the rescue team. Margaret learned later that he had been driving home from his evening classes when he'd seen the accident and immediately stopped to help. The main problem is the car's position, she heard Marcus explaining to the fire chief. The roof is supporting the entire weight, but it's compromised. If we try to extract her through the traditional methods, the whole structure could collapse. Margaret rushed to the scene commander. "That's my sister in there. What's happening?" Captain Rodriguez turned to her with grim concern. "Ma'am, your sister is conscious and talking, which is good, but the vehicle is precariously positioned. We need to stabilize it before we can safely extract her, and our hydraulic equipment can't get the right angle on this terrain." "What about that man?" Margaret pointed to Marcus. "Why is he involved?" "Marcus Johnson? He's a volunteer firefighter with specialized training in vehicle extraction. He also understands the structural engineering of this particular car model better than anyone here. We called him in because this situation requires both technical expertise and creative problem-solving." Margaret watched in amazement as Marcus crawled partially under the wreckage, assessing the structural damage and calculating weight distribution. His movements were confident and methodical, and she could see the rescue team deferring to his expertise. "Emma, can you hear me?" Marcus called into the twisted metal. "My name is Marcus. I'm going to get you out of there, but I need you to stay very still while we work, okay?" Emma's weak voice responded, "Okay, please hurry. I think I'm bleeding." Margaret felt her world collapsing. Her sister, her brilliant, compassionate sister who worked with underprivileged children, was trapped in a death trap, and the person who might save her was the same man she had consistently underestimated and dismissed. For the next 45 minutes, Margaret watched Marcus orchestrate a complex rescue operation. He directed the placement of hydraulic supports, calculated precisely where to cut into the vehicle frame, and personally crawled into dangerous spaces to secure safety lines around Emma. Every decision he made was methodical, intelligent, and focused solely on preserving her sister's life. When the extraction finally succeeded and Emma was safely loaded into an ambulance, injured but stable, Margaret stood in the rain, watching Marcus pack up his equipment. His clothes were torn. His hands were bloody from working with twisted metal, and he was exhausted from the intense physical and mental effort of the rescue. "Marcus!" she called out as he prepared to leave. He turned toward her, his face showing the strain of the night's events. "You saved my sister's life," Margaret said, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know how to thank you." Marcus looked at her with gentle eyes. "I'm just glad she's okay. That's what matters. But you risked your own safety. Spent hours of your time, used your expertise, for someone you don't even know. Why? Because that's what you do when someone needs help," Marcus replied simply. "Your sister's life has value regardless of who she is or who her family is. Every person deserves someone to fight for their safety when they can't fight for themselves." As Margaret drove to the hospital to be with Emma, she realized that everything she'd believed about worth, character, and human value had been exposed as hollow. Marcus had risked his life to save her sister not because of duty or payment, but because of a fundamental belief in human dignity that transcended all the superficial categories Margaret had used to judge people. The man she had dismissed as unsuitable for handling luxury cars had just demonstrated expertise, courage, and moral character that surpassed anyone in her privileged social circle. At the hospital, as Margaret sat beside Emma's bed watching her sister recover from her injuries, the full weight of the night's events settled upon her. Emma was alive because Marcus Johnson, a man Margaret had systematically undervalued and excluded, had possessed both the technical expertise and moral courage to risk his own safety for someone he'd never met. "Marg," Emma whispered weakly, "the man who rescued me. He was extraordinary, so calm and intelligent. He kept talking to me the whole time, explaining what he was doing so I wouldn't be scared." Margaret squeezed her sister's hand. "That was Marcus Johnson. He works at our dealership." Emma's eyes widened slightly. "The mechanic you've been complaining about? The one you said wasn't qualified for luxury vehicles?" Margaret felt ashamed hearing her prejudices reflected back to her. "Yes, I was wrong about him. Completely wrong. Over." The following days, as Emma recovered, Margaret found herself unable to focus on anything but the realization of how fundamentally flawed her judgments had been. She had spent years believing that intelligence, character, and capability were distributed according to class and race, when the reality was that she had simply never bothered to look beyond her own assumptions. The next Monday, Margaret arrived at the dealership with a new sense of purpose. She sought out Marcus in the service bay, where he was working on a complex BMW electrical system. "Marcus, could I speak with you privately?" He followed her to a quiet corner of the facility, and Margaret took a deep breath before speaking. "I've been thinking about Thursday night, about everything that happened. I realize that I owe you more than thanks for saving Emma's life. I owe you an apology for the way I've treated you since you started working here." Marcus listened attentively. As Margaret continued, "I made assumptions about your capabilities, your intelligence, your worth as a person, based on nothing but prejudices I inherited from my upbringing. I realize now that those assumptions were not only wrong but harmful. You've demonstrated expertise, character, and moral courage that exceed anything I've seen in my supposed peer group." "Miss Whitfield," Marcus began, but Margaret held up her hand. "Please let me finish. I want to make things right, not just with words, but with actions. I've been thinking about what real change looks like, and I want your help in implementing it." Margaret outlined her plan. She wanted to restructure the service department to ensure that all technicians were assigned customers based on expertise and availability, not on assumptions about cultural compatibility. She wanted to create mentorship programs where experienced technicians like Marcus could train and develop newer employees. Most importantly, she wanted to use the dealership as a model for merit-based advancement and inclusive excellence. "I'm also going to recommend you for promotion to service manager," Margaret continued. "Tom Rodriguez is retiring next year, and you have both the technical expertise and leadership qualities to excel in that role." Marcus looked surprised. "Miss Whitfield, I appreciate what you're saying, but are you sure about this? Change like this might not be popular with some customers or your family." "I'm sure," Margaret said firmly. "I've spent my entire life surrounded by people who mistake privilege for merit, who confuse inherited advantages with personal worth. You've shown me what real character looks like. If some customers or my family can't accept excellence regardless of who demonstrates it, that's their limitation, not yours." That afternoon, Margaret called a staff meeting to announce the policy changes. Some employees seemed surprised, but many appeared relieved that assignments would be based on qualifications rather than unstated biases. Later that week, Margaret faced her first real test when Mrs. Hamilton, the real estate heiress from her neighborhood association, brought in her Porsche and specifically requested that the black mechanic not work on her car. "Mrs. Hamilton," Margaret said politely but firmly, "Marcus Johnson is our most qualified technician for European luxury vehicles. He has specialized certifications and the highest customer satisfaction ratings in our service department. I'm confident he'll provide exactly the level of expertise your Porsche deserves." Mrs. Hamilton looked shocked. "Margaret, surely you understand my concerns about cultural compatibility." "I understand that you want excellent service," Margaret replied. "Marcus will provide that better than anyone else on our staff. If you're not comfortable with our service standards, I can recommend other dealerships that might better match your preferences." After Mrs. Hamilton reluctantly agreed and later left completely satisfied with Marcus's work, Margaret realized she had crossed a threshold. She was no longer simply questioning her prejudices. She was actively dismantling the systems that perpetuated them. Hello, the Shade of Love family. So happy you're here. Before we jump into the next part of the story, tell us, where are you? Watching from? Drop your country and state in the comments. Also, how's the story been so far? We love reading your thoughts. Yes, every single comment. And it really keeps us motivated. Let's aim for 50 comments on this video. Think we can hit it? Your support means the world, so don't forget to comment, share, and keep the energy flowing. The ultimate test of Margaret's transformation came 3 weeks later at the annual Charlotte Business Excellence Awards, where her father was being honored for his contributions to the local automotive industry. The event brought together the city's most prominent business leaders, and Robert had specifically requested that Margaret give the introduction speech celebrating the Whitfield family's legacy. As Margaret prepared her remarks, she realized she faced a choice. She could deliver the expected speech praising traditional values and established hierarchies, or she could use this platform to challenge the very assumptions that had shaped her family's approach to business and life. Standing at the podium before 300 of Charlotte's most influential leaders, Margaret began with the expected gratitude and family pride. But as she continued, her speech took an unexpected turn. The Whitfield name has been built on a foundation of excellence and customer service, she said, looking directly at her father. But tonight I want to talk about what real excellence looks like and how we sometimes mistake privilege for merit. Faye. Murmur rippled through the audience. Margaret's parents looked confused and concerned. 3 weeks ago, my sister Emma was trapped in a car accident. The person who saved her life was Marcus Johnson, an African-American mechanic from our service department. Marcus demonstrated technical expertise, physical courage, and moral character that surpassed anything I've witnessed in my privileged social circles. The murmur grew louder. Margaret could see Dr. Harrison frowning and Mrs. Hamilton looking scandalized. For too long, I operated under assumptions about who possesses intelligence, who deserves opportunities, and who represents excellence. These assumptions weren't based on evidence or experience. They were inherited prejudices that blinded me to the real merit and character of people like Marcus. Margaret's voice grew stronger as she continued. Marcus speaks multiple languages, holds advanced technical certifications, is pursuing an engineering degree, volunteers in his community, and has demonstrated both professional excellence and personal integrity that should be our standard for leadership. Robert stood up from his seat, clearly intending to intervene, but Margaret continued. As of today, I'm announcing several changes to our business practices. We will implement merit-based advancement policies, eliminate any discriminatory customer service practices, and establish mentorship programs to develop talent regardless of background. We will be promoting Marcus Johnson to Assistant Service Manager, recognizing his qualifications and leadership capabilities. The audience was now in an uproar. Some people were applauding, but Margaret could see many familiar faces showing shock, disapproval, and anger. Her mother looked mortified, and her father appeared furious. If these changes cost us some customers who value discrimination over excellence, so be it, Margaret declared. The Whitfield name will represent real merit, real character, and real integrity, not the artificial hierarchies that have allowed mediocre people to succeed simply because of their race or inherited advantages. As Margaret left the podium, the audience's reaction was split. Younger business leaders and several community activists were applauding enthusiastically, while many of the old guard families sat in stunned silence. Margaret had publicly declared her rejection of the social system that had defined Charlotte's elite for generations. In the parking lot afterward, Margaret's parents confronted her with a mixture of anger and bewilderment. "Margaret, what has gotten into you?" Catherine demanded. "You've embarrassed our family in front of everyone we know." "I've told the truth," Margaret replied calmly, "and I've aligned our business practices with our stated values of excellence and merit." Robert was more direct. "You've let one incident cloud your judgment about social realities. This will hurt our business, our reputation, and our standing in the community. If our reputation depends on discrimination and prejudice, then it deserves to be hurt," Margaret responded. Marcus Johnson saved Emma's life. He's demonstrated character and competence that exceed most of our country club friends. If acknowledging that threatens our social standing, maybe we need better friends. Over the following days, Margaret faced significant backlash from her social circle. Several longtime family friends stopped speaking to the Whitfields. The country club buzzed with gossip about Margaret's radical transformation and speculation about what had caused her to turn against her own people. But Margaret also received unexpected support. Emma, still recovering from her injuries, publicly endorsed her sister's changes. Several younger employees at the dealership expressed gratitude for the new merit-based policies. Local community leaders reached out to praise Margaret's courage in challenging systemic discrimination. Most importantly, Margaret began receiving thank-you letters from customers who had noticed the improved service quality and from parents whose children were benefiting from the expanded community programs Marcus was now helping to coordinate. Margaret realized that taking a public stand had cost her some relationships, but had gained her something far more valuable: the respect that comes from aligning actions with principles, and the peace that comes from treating all people with the dignity they deserve. 6 months after that pivotal night when Marcus saved Emma's life, Margaret sat in her office reviewing the quarterly reports that showed the service department's highest customer satisfaction scores in company history. Marcus had officially been promoted to service manager, and under his leadership, the department had achieved new levels of excellence, while also becoming a model for inclusive hiring and advancement practices. The changes hadn't been without cost. Some longtime customers had indeed taken their business elsewhere, and several family friends continued to view Margaret's transformation with suspicion and disapproval. Her relationship with her parents remained strained, though Robert had grudgingly admitted that the business metrics supported Margaret's decisions, but the benefits far outweighed the costs. The dealership was attracting new customers who appreciated the merit-based service model. Employee morale was at an all-time high, and the company had received recognition from the Charlotte Chamber of Commerce for innovative workplace practices. More personally, Margaret had discovered relationships and perspectives that enriched her life in ways she'd never anticipated. Her friendship with Marcus had evolved into a mutual respect based on shared values of excellence, integrity, and service. Through him, she'd met other remarkable individuals: teachers, engineers, artists, and entrepreneurs whose character and capabilities had been invisible to her when she'd viewed the world through the lens of inherited prejudices. Emma had fully recovered from her injuries and had become one of Margaret's strongest supporters in promoting inclusive business practices. "You know," Emma said during one of their regular coffee meetings, "I think the accident changed both of us. It showed you what real heroism looks like, and it showed me how much courage it takes to admit you've been wrong about something fundamental." Margaret nodded, remembering the journey from that first day when she'd questioned Marcus's ability to work on luxury vehicles to the night when his expertise and character had saved her sister's life. "I keep thinking about all the talented people I must have overlooked or underestimated over the years. How many Marcus Johnsons were right in front of me, but I couldn't see them because of my assumptions." The most profound change had been internal. Margaret no longer felt the need to maintain artificial hierarchies or justify inherited privileges. Instead, she found genuine satisfaction in recognizing and developing excellence wherever it appeared. She discovered that real leadership meant creating opportunities for others to demonstrate their capabilities, not protecting systems that advantaged mediocrity simply because it came from the right backgrounds. One evening, as Margaret prepared to leave the dealership, she found Marcus in the service bay working with a group of teenagers from the community center. He was teaching them about hybrid engine technology, and Margaret was struck by the focused attention and respectful engagement of these young people who, 6 months ago, she would have dismissed as probably uninterested in technical education. "Miss Whitfield," one of the teenagers called out, noticing her. "Mr. Johnson was just explaining how these electric motors work with regular engines. It's like having two power sources that know how to work together perfectly." Margaret smiled at the metaphor's broader implications. "That sounds like a pretty good model for how people can work together, too. Different strengths combining to create something better than either could achieve alone." Marcus looked up from the engine they were examining and smiled at Margaret. It was a look of mutual respect and shared understanding. Two people who had moved beyond the superficial categories that once divided them to discover the common values that could unite them. As Margaret drove home through Charlotte's diverse neighborhoods, she reflected on how much her perspective had changed. Where she once saw confirmation of social hierarchies, she now saw the results of unequal opportunities and systemic barriers. Where she once felt superior, she now felt grateful for the chance to learn from people whose experiences and insights complemented her own privileged background. The transformation hadn't been easy. Questioning fundamental beliefs, admitting profound errors, and changing established practices required courage and humility that Margaret hadn't known she possessed. But the result was a life that felt more authentic, relationships that were more genuine, and a business that truly reflected the values of excellence and integrity she'd always claimed to embrace. Marcus Johnson had saved more than Emma's life that night. He had saved Margaret from a worldview that would have kept her forever separated from the full spectrum of human excellence and character. In teaching her to see beyond prejudice and privilege, he had given her the gift of discovering who she could become when she stopped limiting herself and others by the artificial boundaries of inherited bias. The mechanic's expertise had fixed more than broken engines and damaged cars. It had repaired Margaret's broken understanding of human worth and restored her faith in the possibility that merit, character, and compassion could triumph over prejudice, privilege, and fear.